by now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keeping your microphone muted except where I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or a comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do so. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I also remind members and officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published to the Council's website. Members, I will begin by calling the names of all members of the committee to establish your presence. Please confirm you are here with a simple response. Councillor Ian Bates.
Present.
Councillor Chris Bowden.
Present.
John Gowing.
Present.
David Jenkins.
Present.
Linda Jones.
Present.
Peter MacDonald.
Present.
Terry Rogers.
Present.
Mike Shellings.
Here.
Tim Wotherspoon.
Present.
And myself, Mark Goldsack. Chair, would Dawn, do we report any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No, no flurry of blanks there. Thank you. That's fine. We'll move on to the next bit. In that case, we're at item 2 on the agenda. I will try my best, but juggling screens doesn't always make it possible, but I will try my best to give you the pages of the areas that we're in. So, Chair, we are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 11th of September as a correct record. Can I ask any member that does not agree with this proposal to click the raised hand function on the right of the screen now? I see no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as correct, so we will take that as carried. Okay, also moving on to the updated action log. This was included in the second dispatch of papers on Monday. Officers, do we have anything to add to the action log? I'm seeing some shakes of heads, not nods. Chris Mallion, would you like to come in?
Yes, Chairman, if I may, just on action 307 regarding the full business case, because there are still some negotiations going on in relation to the heads of terms around the disposal of Shire Hall. I wonder if members would give me the ability to defer that until January.
Okay, members, anybody against that? David Jenkins, I think you're waving your hand.
Nothing against it, but I would like to understand why there's been this delay. We've been at this for such a long time, so there shouldn't be anything new coming out of the woodwork.
You might think that, Councillor Jenkins, and I would tend to agree with you, but only this week Brookgate have suggested a different element in relation to fees, which affects the overall capital sum. That's something I'll bring back to the members' working party or working group that we have next week. So whilst I'd agree with you in principle, they still haven't been signed. And of course, obviously the heads of terms are just a shaping of the contractual documents. So there's still opportunity for those to change before the actual contracts come forward.
Okay, so on that basis, I'm kind of sensing there's no problem with you taking that through to January. If anybody has an objection to that, please raise your hand, your blue hand, that is. Okay, we're okay with that then, Chris. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, item 3, petitions and public questions. We have received one public question, but this relates to this land item later in the agenda, so will be considered under that item. 4, business planning proposals. In the absence of Amanda, I think, Chloe, you're going to lead us on this one. So the floor is yours, Chloe. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So the paper this morning for the business planning is to give current progress of our annual business and budgetary planning control process. Coming into this financial year, the current plan was looking pretty good. It was achievable as within the realms of being balanced, and then 2 short months within it being approved in February, we went into lockdown. So as you can imagine, coming into this year's process has seen us with an unforeseen challenge, and we are operating within a landscape that is uncertain and changing. So we've taken a slightly different approach to business planning this year so far. We are adopting a scenario-based approach, which is A, B, and C, and they are reflecting an increase in level of impact as we go through those. In section 3.1 of this paper, we've put that we think there's a minimum impact of about £32.8 million, and that's based on scenario A. However, as you can imagine, since we took this snapshot in time, the country has continued to see a surge in COVID cases. So we think it's much more prudent to say that we're probably looking at a £40 million gap across the authority for 21-22. So it's we've started to put some detail on 3.2.1, and we will further refine those adjustments as we go in the coming weeks. For Commercial Investments Committee specifically, we're looking at an impairment of around £2 million for the first financial year in the new business planning for 21-22. And this is more about impairment of savings and reductions in income across our commercial portfolio. The detail for that is in 6.1, and we can go over that should you wish to. I know I always say this, but this is a snapshot in time. The picture is developing every day. It used to be kind of monthly, we would see some change. It's now daily, we're seeing some change. And it, depending on what we're going to do in terms of lockdown over the coming weeks, we may see further changes. So further work between now and December is being undertaken to look at the impact of the economy on our customers, the markets that we're operating within, and what that looks like for our services. But what I really want to kind of leave the committee thinking is that we are pushing forward to think about the opportunities that the current situation is also giving us. For the first time ever, really, we are on quite a level playing field with some of our private and voluntary sector partners, and it's becoming very much a we problem. So we need to look at how we can start to develop our relationships further so we can help a recovery, however swift that can be. We're also looking at our customers. They're adapting very, very well to a virtual delivery and a different kind of relationship with us. So how can we build on those further? And I have taken real heart, really, in the last month that our portfolio is standing up to be pretty resilient. We shared an investment group recently that Brunswick House is over 70% capacity. If you'd said to us 3 or 4 months ago that we would be there, I don't think we would have predicted that. So that's what I mean. We've got a changing picture and we're having to be dynamic and respond to it. So as I say, we're coming back in December with much more refinement to these figures and some more robust business cases that will support it. But our key focus has to be about minimizing this impairment and reduction in savings. So myself and my team, we're looking into how can we try to remove the impact of that £2 million, and that's where we'll be concentrating over the coming weeks. I'll leave it there because there's a lot of detail in this paper, but you might see a number of committees over this month. But if there are any questions, Chris, Tom and I are available to help answer them.
Well, before I even ask if members would like to raise a question and make a comment, please raise the hands. We have a couple of hands up already, Chloe, so be armed and be ready. And in the order that they come, Chris Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Chloe, for that report. And thank you, officers, for the report which has been produced. It is clearly sensible to have different scenarios placed before us. The amount of uncertainty which exists at the moment is greater than we've ever faced before in terms of local government, certainly. And it would be wrong to minimize the difficulty which is faced in predicting what the future will be. So I very much look forward to a greater refinement which comes forward in December, but I'm not expecting that refinement massively to reduce the uncertainty which I'm sure will still exist at that time. I have a point to make, and Chloe twice used the word during her introduction, and it's used extensively in section 6 of this report, and that is the use of the word impairment, particularly permanent impairment, when relating to revenue rather than capital. And I find that a potentially very misleading use of the word. And I'd personally be very grateful if officers could consider not using the words impairment or permanent impairment unless we are talking about capital. Because normally in financial reports, if you see something is permanently impaired, it means there's been a reduction, a long-term reduction in its capital value. And I find it jarring to see that word impairment being used when we are talking about either a reduction in anticipated income or a reduction in anticipated savings in future years. So I just wonder if officers could give some consideration to only using the words impairment, and especially permanent impairment, when talking about the capital side, not talking about the revenue side, and to find alternative words for that. Thank you.
Do you want to come back on that, Chloe?
I think
Well,
that's
if it is
something that we
you-
can
if it
look
is
at as
indeed
officers
you.
across the piece. I'm getting nods from Tom, so yeah.
I apologise, I missed that. Did you say that basically that's noted and will be dealt with moving forward? Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Terry Rogers, please. You're next in line. Still on mute, Terry.
Apologies, Chair. I appreciate we're here today really in essence to look at paragraph 6, and that applies to us at C&I in particular. But I read through paragraphs 1 to 5 and I have some general comments. Rather than bore you all, what I intend to do is just mention them in outline, and I'll send you an email, Chair, and ask for more detail from the officers accordingly. But basically at 2.4, we're discussing things about care homes, and I'd like to refer us back what we discussed about 2 years ago on that one, and block purchasing. And then we have the 3 particular areas where we're projecting inflation double of that of other inflations. In other words, coroners and public transport and home to school. Also like to discuss with the officers the calculations based on pay inflation, and also at 2.8 some questions on the new pressures. That's all I'm going to say with regards to those particular items, but as I said, I will email and hope to get a response on that side. Otherwise, I agree with Chris as regards his comments on paragraph 6. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Terry. So just to qualify that, you're going to write to me and then I'll pass it on to the officers, but that I think that's a good way. Thank you. Mike Shellens, please. Mike, you are also on mute, sir.
Why does the unmute button hide itself at the critical moment? Right, sorry about that delay. First of all, I want to say that having had to write papers, difficult papers in the past, how delighted I am not to have to write this one, because it seems to me to be an almost impossible paper to write with any degree of security of thinking. And it's much easier to sit here and ask questions about it. In her introduction, Chloe talked about uncertain and challenging time, and Chris talked about a challenging picture, and also talked about movement in numbers that are going on as we speak. I mean, there's £1 billion apparently from the government earlier this week, which isn't reflected in the paper, shock horror. I wonder whether there is something to be gained in terms of marginally less uncertainty if we pushed the whole process of this paper back 1 month. Having looked at the schedule at the end, we appear to have March unoccupied, and I would think that there is value in terms of confidence about what we're talking about to move things back. Secondly, I note, or rather I note the absence of the word Brexit. I'm amazed that that word does not figure in the paper. I've got lots of other comments later on in the document, Chairman, but I'll pause at that stage.
Okay, I think, Ian, with the greatest respect, Ian Bates, your hand is next, but I think Chris Mallion probably wants to come in on what has just been spoken about. Is that fair, Chris?
That is, Chairman. If I may just pick up on the first point in particular. The reason, I mean, whilst it would be nice to have a month's flexibility in terms of developing out the scenarios and the implications thereof, we have to be clear that we have to set a balanced budget in February. Statutorily, we don't have any choice in that. There is a week's grace in order that should the council not decide, we have a reserve meeting. But the requirement is for us to notify our precepting colleagues in district councils in order that they can send out the bills 6 weeks in advance of the first instalment, unless the government are going to suspend those regulations, which there is no indication that that is the case. Unfortunately, we can't create an additional month. All I can say, Chairman, is we are constant, as mentioned in closed introduction, we are constantly updating the information. One of the key elements which we're all in the dark about at the moment, we're in the dark about what the implications of demand are going to be, and we've made our best estimates based on the scenarios that are set out in the report. But we clearly don't know what level of support we're going to get from the government next year. I mean, obviously the focus, understandably, is dealing with the immediate implications, and Councillor Shelling's referenced the additional £1 billion for all local authorities, which was announced earlier this week. We don't know yet how much of that is coming to the County Council. That will mitigate some of the in-year pressures that are coming through the system. But as I've said on numerous occasions, that the key issue for Cambridgeshire is not actually the current year, it's next year. And you know, we have no idea how much funds will be made available to local authorities as part of the spending review, albeit that's likely to just be a one-year spending review.
Okay, Chris, I think it's probably right and fair if I can give Mike the chance to come back on that. So, and you also did say that you'd got a couple of other things as well, Mike. So unmute and you're back in.
I have unmuted, Chairman. I got that one right. No, I just give in, Chairman, on the timing, and I'll deal with the other points later on when more.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bates, please. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on 6.1, which is the implications for this particular committee. I would make a strong suggestion that when it comes back to us in December, that we highlight all of our investments that we've made. This particular has a description here of the Cromwell Leisure, and then it goes on to the farms, but it doesn't highlight all of them. And I think it would be useful to have all of them listed with whatever the outcome of those discussions with those particular organisations, Mr. Chairman. So I'm looking for a more comprehensive list, I think, in December. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a fair request. I think it's just it's a level of detail, isn't it? So I think if we can come down a few thousand feet into lower ground level, I think we'll be okay on that. So thank you. We've got Councillor Jenkins. David, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I understand it's awfully difficult with the changing environment at the moment, but if you look at the description of scenario A at the moment, it really is so far away from any sort of reality. We do actually need to sort of recalibrate what we're doing going forward. And I'd like to see some definition of what exactly scenario B and C are, because that's not clear. And the implication came from Chris is that maybe we're into a sort of A+. Well, what I'm hearing is more like a B or a B+ at the moment. So I think a little bit of upfront honesty and realism is really necessary at the moment. And whereas I think discussions about impairment or not impairment is a bit of nice semantics, I think we do need to get our minds around some fairly brutal words as to what these different scenarios are going to mean for us in the future, because the public will see the word impairment and they won't know what it means. So we need to come up with a word which is clear and graphic. And maybe we should declare that we're going for scenario B now and move forward on that basis.
Thanks, David. Chris, I'm assuming again your hand's raised to come back on David's points.
Correct, Chairman. Yes, we'll happily provide the detail that sits behind both scenario B and C. But just to pick up the point that Councillor Jenkins made, I mean, we're in a no-win situation. These reports were built, or the data that sits behind them were built over a number of months, and at a time when the level of the infection rate was fairly stable. albeit we were aware that there were pressures coming through the system, and everybody had been talking about a second wave in November. And picking up again on Chloe's point, that the information that we're now getting is being updated daily, and we can't remodel. I do take the point entirely, and I do accept that the modelling that has been undertaken to date is already out of date. But we are, as I say, we are constantly updating that to provide a better, more realistic figure. So just to summarise, therefore, that these scenarios were predicated on data we had available over a month ago, and Amanda's BI business intelligence team are working to create a more robust picture going forward. But I do take Councillor Jenkins' point. No targeting, hence the reason why we've gone for A plus, for want to use Councillor Jenkins' terms. You could well argue that we should be targeting B or even potentially B plus.
Okay.
But all I can say to members is we will constantly update that and provide more robust figures as they become available.
Okay, thank you. I think it's fair to say that many of the documents we see are living and breathing one. This one is running at full pace, I think, as well as living and breathing. So, Councillor Jones, Linda, please.
Thank you. And I do sympathise with you trying to keep up to date. Sorry. Let me turn that off.
It wasn't me calling you, Linda. It wasn't me.
No, I've just put the phone outside the door. Answer it.
Okay.
Wonderful IT.
Sorry about that.
At least it's being recorded, so we can have a laugh at this later as well, Linda. Thank you.
No, I was going to say I do sympathise with you. I sat through. I was involved in the health committee yesterday, and our poor director of public health had only written the report a couple of days before, and already it was out of date. And this is the way that things are moving. From a lay point of view, I would suggest that instead of impairment, we might use the term shortfall. I've often found the language of local authorities, having worked in another sector for most of my career, very strange. I mean pressures, for example, as opposed to budget gaps and so on. So I think shortfall would be much easier. And if we're redoing the document in terms of people, the public understanding it, which I think they will need to, I think that could be helpful. Just a general comment I was going to make about the paper, not particularly about commercial investment. One of the things that seems to me is coming out, and again, this was evident from children, young people area and adults area, is that there is more pressure, that there is more poverty, there is more call for services. So, I mean, I think we're going to have to kind of try and factor some of those things in when we're thinking about budgeting. Because there is a lot of need out there, which the county will have to try and respond to some extent. I remain very concerned about levels of need that are being expressed right across the county, particularly in more remote areas like Fenland.
Thank you, Linda. Mike, back to you, sir.
Right, got it finally. I'm trying to work two screens full.
In that boat.
Right. Looking at the forecast for 22/3, I note that there is a minus 1,300 for the guided bus. I know the guided bus is areas that we enter into with great trepidation, but I wonder if anybody could give me a little background on that. And also there's a saving of 190,000 on Babbage House dilapidations, which I would like to see. But I think there's a more fundamental point, which is, let's suppose that we have to go to looking at 82 million, yeah, option C. And the government keeps quiet until the beginning of the year. And then the government comes up with money. How are we going to handle a continually moving situation? And again, I repeat what I said earlier, I'm really glad I'm not doing this.
I think before we go on to that, can I just clarify, Mike? Are you wanting answers on your first two, or should we just discuss the second part? Or maybe as perhaps maybe a way forward on this, there's a number of points you're raising here, and I think this is an ever-moving target here. If you maybe want to drop me an email and I'd share it with the officers and come back to everybody, but it's entirely up to you. Happy to ask the officers to answer the points.
Whatever you prefer, Chairman. You're in charge.
Well,
I'll do as I'm told.
I did
For
see
once.
Chris raise a hand, which is now gone. Do you want to answer those, Chris?
It was more about the last item, Chairman. Albeit there was a couple of specifics that was raised by Councillor Shellings. One of them's not in the purview of this committee, so probably ones that we ought to deal with outside. In terms of Babbage House, we did make provision around coming out of Babbage House, which was took place earlier in this financial year, for which a provision was made around dilapidations. But I'm sure we can provide the detail that sits behind that as well.
Okay, I think well, I think it's probably a good idea if there are any particular points on things like that, not just for Mike but for anybody. You know, we don't have to wait for these meetings for you to get this information. If you want to get this information, I know that you know, Chloe and Dan and all the team there, and Anne and Amanda are more than willing to try and help you with this information. So just come through me and we can get the answers. But a couple more hands been raised.
Sorry, Chairman, but I did ask, how do we handle a continually moving set of goalposts?
Yes, Chairman, that was what I actually put my hand up to respond to. So if I may, through you, Chair, just respond to the question raised by Councillor Shellings. You may or may not be aware, but we are engaging proactively with MHCLG, who are obviously the government department that overview local government finances. We have started a process to ensure that they are aware of our financial position. And let's be honest about it, we know we're by no means alone in our current forecasting, and in many ways there are quite a few authorities that are facing significantly worse scenarios in the current financial year than we are. But we have, in accordance with SIT for guidance, we've taken proactive action and engaged MHCLG at an officer level to start a dialogue around how we're going to approach the challenges faced by the council in relation to next year's budget. I think it's fair to say that the government are completely aware of the predicament in which, or the challenges that local government is facing. They are looking to try and bring their spending review statements out in December. Now, we are stressing with them that we need to be clear about what our support levels are going to be for 21-22 before we put our budget papers out in January. Because otherwise, taking the issues, if it goes well beyond, the scenario A, we probably could scrape by in terms of using council tax increases, financing which is set out in the report, and potential use of reserves. If we go to, and picking up Councillor Jenkins' point, if the scenario is more likely to be a B+, or even, as Councillor Shellings highlighted, the C scenario, we simply can't fund that. And I can't fund it from the reserves that we've got available, even stripping out everything we've got in the balance sheet if it's up towards the upper end of that scenario modelling. Therefore, the implications of that are I would have to issue a Section 114 statement, which effectively says that the council can't meet its liabilities. Now, I want to be clear that we're not anywhere near that position, and we want to obviously avoid it. Hence the reason why we're engaging early with MHCLG to talk through what the mitigations and flexibilities that might be afforded and what additional support could be afforded by the government. But we are, I'm not trying to undermine or not undermine, that's not the right word. I'm not trying to cover up or anything, or I'm trying to be transparent in terms of the challenges that we're facing. But we're not alone, and therefore there is a robust, not just direct interventions with the government department, but also through national networks, the CCN, the County Council Network and the Society of County Treasurers are all working collectively in order to try and get clarity sooner rather than later. But for understandable reasons, the government's immediate issue is dealing with the current year, not next year. So that's quite a long-winded way of saying I haven't got that information.
And I'm not surprised, Chris. The scenario I can envisage is that we go into next year with a given figure, whatever it is, the 42 or the 85 or whatever, and that causes us to make some quite radical changes to the supplies, to the services we provide, and then the government partway through the year says, "Oh dear me, this can't carry on. We'll find some more money," and therefore the decisions that we've taken and the people that we've laid off and the services we've cancelled, we need not have done if they'd only made that decision early. And I don't see any way that you can actually prepare for that, but I just flag up that I see a continuing mess and how glad I am that I won't be a councillor next year.
Chairman,
Okay.
if I may, Chairman, if I may, just through you, part of that discussion with the MHCLG is to do exactly that, to exemplify what the implications are going to be for the council. Hence the reason why we're pushing them to understand these are the decisions that we'll be taking in January unless we hear otherwise, for that very reason that Councillor Jones has highlighted. So we are putting pressure on the government to come forward sooner rather than later.
Okay, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Chris. Right, Peter McDonald, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think Chris Mellion has actually addressed several of the points I was going to ask about. First of all, the only analogy I can think for this, and I have huge sympathy for the officers, is trying to land a jumbo jet on an aircraft carrier in terms of determining what the budget should be. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't know where to, well, I would know where to start. I wouldn't know where to finish. So the officers really have my sympathies. I do, however, agree with Mike, and Chris Mellion has addressed it to some extent, is let's have the discussion as early as we possibly can on what the implications are for our residents, so that time spent in planning is never wasted, and the earlier, even if we take a pessimistic view, which subsequently seems to be too pessimistic, that's maybe in the current situation a better approach. But I do trust the officers and what they're doing. Okay,
thanks, Peter. David?
Yeah, very, very quickly, and I hope this adds value. We've obviously operating in unprecedented times. We've got an officer group in which we have 100% confidence. So thank you, Chris, and your team for the work you're doing. But recognizing that councils have quite a lot of bureaucracy in their organization and their processes and the way they do things. Is it possible that we can lift some of that bureaucracy so that we can be a more nimble organization over the next months, so that we don't say, oh, we wrote that report 6 weeks ago and things have changed? Can we somehow get to the stage whereby we can have our reports which are more immediate? And can we free up the officers to do a better job by things that we as councillors can do?
Okay, anybody want to come back on that, or any officers? I'm not seeing a rush of red. Oh, okay, go on, Chris.
I feel like whilst I understand entirely, Chairman, I would support the principle of Councillor Jenkins' comments. Like everything, there is a statutory framework within which we operate, and there's a capacity issue. As Councillor Jones highlighted, the Director of Public Health had written a report, and with 2 days it was out of date. That there's a degree of acceptance that that we do need to become more nimble, but there's also the physical ability of the council to cope with that ever-changing environment. So perhaps I could just leave it with me and talk to colleagues around how we can be more flexible in our approach without breaching the publication requirements that are set out in statute.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, David. I'm going to go to Chris Bode, and then I'm going to draw a line onto this. I think we've all had a good go at this. So, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. We have in fact moved quite a bit away from discussing our committee's work, looking more generally at the challenges facing local government generally and county council in particular. That we've diverted away from this particular committee. I have to say, in answer to some of the points which have been made so far, I think that all local government officers in all councils are going to have to be a lot more agile in this budget round than they ever have before. And it may be that officers will be obliged to provide us with reports which contain less, I was going to use the word verbiage, that's a bad word to use, less narrative and more simple numbers in order that they have enough time to be able to produce what needs to be produced so that we can make decisions at the times that we have to make them. Because to be perfectly honest, I'm not confident that the information that we need will arrive from central government until maybe very close to the last moment. And if officers are obliged to take a few shortcuts and to provide us with fewer words and more numbers, I think that's something we all must accept. One thing that Chris Malyon may be interested to hear is that at least according to one senior government minister who should be in the know, and you can work out who that is from by yourself, the spending review will contain a multi-year local government settlement. We will see.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I'd just like to sum up myself on here, if I can, before going to the objectives of this. Look, I think there's been a violent agreement across the room here that we are all in some really choppy waters. I love the phrase, I think it came from Mike, about the moving goalposts. I'm not even sure people know where the goalposts are, let alone where, you know, when they find them, they're then moving. I'd also like to echo some points. Certainly David raised this, as did Chris. As members, I think we're in the hands of some fantastic officer teams in this area in Cambridgeshire, and I think we've got every confidence. And I think what we're doing here is just giving you a steer and a carte blanche to keep us informed as and when you wish. You know, I really enjoy the fact that we get to talk between meetings, and I feel very up to date in where we're at and what we're doing. But recognising poor public health officer, you know, to spend all that time and energy and effort and writing a report to find 48 hours later it's thrown out is wrong. Having said that, again, David Jenkins' point, a report that's written 6 weeks in advance is probably ill-advised at this moment in time, and maybe we're back to all being students again and getting them all done just in time. Thank you. We were asked to note the overview and context provided for the 2020, for the 21-22 and to 25-26 business plans. We were asked to note the impact of COVID-19 on the council financial planning. I think it's fair to say we have more than noted them. Thank you very much, Chloe, for bringing the report. I'd like to move on now, please, to number 5, which is pages 27 to 42 of the committee list. Service Committee review of the draft 21-22 capital programme. And I believe it's Ellie that's bringing this for us. Ellie.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the capital version of the revenue paper that you've just seen. So it provides the first review for committee of the draft C&I capital programme for the 21-22 business plan. Sections 1 to 4 are generic sections that have been sent to all committees, and they go through the capital strategy parameters that we work within, how the programme is developed, the interrelationship with revenue planning, and then a summary of the overall draft figures for each service, each service committee, detailing funding sources and how the borrowing position has changed from the 2021 programme that was set back in February. So section 5 is the service specific section for C&I, and section 5.4 goes through the changes that have been made to existing schemes. They mainly relate to rephasing on the 6 energy schemes, but also changes to the Community Hubs East Barnwell project and small changes to the housing schemes project. 5.5 details an additional scheme that has been added for development funding work. That really kind of has been split out from the housing schemes work, because originally that work was all within the one scheme, but the housing schemes project now specifically relates just to this land. So we've split out the bit of work that relates to other sites where planning work is ongoing. And then 5.6 just takes you through a couple of areas that we're still working on and where updates will be provided to the committee in December, and that relates to CAMS 2020 and the building maintenance project. And that's it. Thank you. got any questions?
Okay, well, you beat me to the question of asking if they've got any questions, so well done. Any questions for Ellie on what she's reporting there? Chris Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to make a general observation, which is not meant as a criticism of officers, but to point out a contradiction which exists. And I fully accept that officers are following standard local government procedure in what they're doing. However, I feel that, especially when it comes to this committee, C&I committee, and what it is that we're responsible for, it's important that this discrepancy is noted. It is stated in the report, and I'll quote, that it's paragraph 1.2. Detailed estimates of schemes in later years only provide indicative forecasts of the likely infrastructure needs and revenue streams for the council. And that is fine. You wouldn't expect detail for later years, but in practice, we don't say what we believe are likely to be the requirements for revenue and for capital in later years. What we do is we put in what we can project from what we know now. And that's the standard way in which it's done in local government. But if you look at the revised capital programme, for example, you see that in 22-23, it's projected a total figure of 168 million, whereas 25-26 is showing a figure of 34 million. And the truth is, of course, that the figure in 25-26 is likely to be just as high as in 22-23, if not more. We are not projecting what we believe is going to happen in the figures that we're given. What we are projecting is what we know now based on the current state of affairs and what has already been agreed for those future years. But we know that in 3-4 years' time, the figures are going to be a lot higher than are shown here. And I'd just like to point out that contradiction because it's an important one because of our role in ensuring that we get both revenue coming in and also have capital under control in terms of what we do. And we have to fit in with the way in which the council will actually be operating in 3 or 4 years' time, rather than necessarily with the figures which are shown here. Now, it's not meant as a criticism of officers. I understand exactly why it's done, and it's absolutely standard local government practice. But I think that discrepancy needs to be brought out. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I think we'll just move on to the next question, if that's okay. I don't think there was any real reason to come back on that one, was there, Chris? Terry Rogers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ellie, if I could refer you to 5.1, and we're looking at the list there, and we're looking at strategic assets, and we go from 1.8 down to 400. I then cross-refer to paragraph 5.5. How does that paragraph correlate to the figures that we've got in 5.1, please?
I'll just have a quick check. So I believe that the figures that are in the strategic assets line mainly relate to community hubs, East Barwell, and then the development planning going forward. I'm just checking where the yes, and so the CAMS 2020 is in that section as well. At the moment, all of the spend is in for 2021. So that's the work that is ongoing, that some of that is going to be pushed back into 21-22. So you will see an increase in that 21-22 figure when you next get the set of figures. But at the moment, that work, at the point where this report was written and submitted, that work hadn't quite completed.
That's what worried me. I thought there might have been a carry forward and it wasn't reflected in the figures that you've got.
That's correct, but it will be in the next set of figures that you get.
Thank you very much indeed. Question answered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Terry. Mike Shellens, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've got my speaker on this time.
Very good.
Marvellous. Moving goalposts, etc. Got an email last night, I think it was from Cheryl, saying that Swaffham Prior and the low carbon work has not been given the money that they were looking for. What impact is that likely to have on next year's figures and any implications for further delayed changes?
Are you happy for me to answer that, Chair?
Please do.
Yep.
As long as you weren't sitting back and expecting me to answer it, Ellie, that was, please,
No.
please do step in and I'll let you answer it.
I mean, I say that I'm going to answer it, but I'm not actually sure that I've got an answer I can give you at this moment. So I wasn't aware that that had that was the case. So obviously we will have to go back and look at that. I believe that the business case that had been set up was predicated on that funding. So I don't know what Plan B is. So I will have to go back and speak to the service about that and come back to you.
And you'll let us know the results of your. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, can I just bring in Tim Wotherspoon, because I know I'm assuming this came out of E&S committee yesterday, and Tim, I think you're the vice chair on that, aren't you?
It wasn't actually at the committee itself, yes, this relates to the 8 million cap in renewable heat incentive applications, and provisional tariff guarantees are now at 8.7 million, and they don't include the requests from us for Swaffham Prior or the 3 Academy ground source heat pump, air source heat pump, arrangements. And officers are still working out the implications for that. So we can't actually give you the answer you're seeking, Mike. But we have a meeting, let's say officers have a meeting set up with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy on Monday, and we will find out after that.
Okay, thanks for stepping in there, Tim. Appreciate that. Right, we'll move on. Councillor Bates, Ian, please. Sorry, I'm looking at Tim.
Okay, forget the name. Ellie, I'm looking at 5.4, and you bullet pointed starting with St Ives and then Babraham and then Trumpington and Stand Ground, etc. And I noticed that they all start with what are called rephasing. Okay, I think it would be useful actually to actually ask for, well, when will it likely to come to fruition? I'm very aware of the St Ives one. It's been on the cards for quite considerable amount of time now. So I understand why you're rephasing, if I could put my teeth properly in, as they say. But I think it'd be useful to actually sort of say, when would you anticipate these work by St Ives, Babraham, Trumpington, Stand Ground, the solar park, etc., when that's likely to come to fruition? It's a too general a phrase. It needs to be tied down a little stronger. Not expecting an answer, Ellie, at the moment, but I think actually something for the next report when it comes to December. And then really, the second point really is this not covered within Josh Schuman's and Councillor Wotherspoon's committee? I appreciate that this is this committee, but is it them or us? Sorry, that's slightly... Please.
Okay, so in terms of the kind of the timescales, if you look at Appendix 1, I'm not sure what page, it's page 37, that gives an indication of when we're expecting to spend the significant amounts on these schemes. So a lot of them are expected to spend in 21-22 at this point, with I think Trumpington in particular going slightly beyond that towards 23-24. But I can do a slightly more detailed narrative and send that round to committee if that would help, about the specific reasons and some of the maybe key milestones in those projects. In terms of the committees, that is a good question. I think the budget for this or these schemes does still sit with C&I at the moment. However, some of the operation decisions, the operation decisions are being sent to E&S to review as well. So there's a slight dual process going on for some of these schemes at the moment.
If I can just come in on that, then I'm going to bring Peter in. I think that we've given this a fair debate, but at chairman's level and vice chair levels, we have actually spoke with the E&S and C&I, and it's a grey line. But what we've basically said was, if the project is geared towards basically mainly a commercial return, then that will be a project for us. If it is geared towards, it may or may not have a commercial return, but environmentally and climately wise, it's absolutely the right thing to do, then that would reside in E&S. I think I got that right. I can see Chris Bowden nodding. So that just to give a little bit of clarity on it. Peter McDonald, please.
Thanks, Chair. Ellie, I think the approach to this may be similar to what Ian just raised. If I look at Trumpington, the smart energy grid, it's all been rephased out to 23, 24, and there may be really good reasons for that. So maybe offline, if we could have an update, because when you see a project of that size completely rephased, it does raise some question marks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If you can maybe share that around the committee, Ellie. I mean, the thing with these rephasing is I totally get your point, Peter. I mean, I know in my ward that the Soham North Angle Farm went before planning last week and got a very favourable response. So you know that that has an automatic change. That was probably after the report was written, to be honest with you, in terms of knowing the exact. And there's a real live example of what's moving on. So thank you very much. I think there's no more blue hands. We'll bring it to a close there. So we were asked to note the overview and context provided for the 21-22 capital programme for C&I and comment on the draft proposals for the commercial and investments 21-22 capital programme and endorse their development. I think we've done that, haven't we? Everybody quite comfortable with that? So thank you very much for bringing the report, Ellie. We will move on to item 6, page 43 on your agenda pack. The committee agenda plan, training plan and appointments to outside bodies. Dawn, are there any updates to the agenda plan or training plan to report, please?
Chairman, for the agenda plan, the only one to note is that we've got the financial monitoring reports will be coming back to every committee meeting. We were just getting them being circulated up during the COVID period, but we're now going to be considering them at every meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Dawn. Any members got any, any members of the committee wish to ask a question and make a comment on the agenda plan? Not seeing any hands. So Dawn, next question for you. Are there any appointments for us to consider, please?
The only one is to note that Councillor Jones was appointed to the Adults Committee Care Suites Working Group under Chair's delegation since the last meeting.
I'll just add a little bit on that myself, if I can. Very pleased to see Linda accept that. I was asked by the Vice Chair of Adults for a nomination that couldn't wait until our next meeting. So I had a brief chat with the Vice Chairman, spoke to Linda about it, who's obviously got some expertise in this field. She's very gratefully taken that on our behalf, and I'm sure we're all very happy for Linda to do that for us. David, yes, if you want to come in on that.
I note the expression Chair's delegation, which is a wonderful fig leaf under which to hide all sorts of transgressions. It would not have been difficult, Chair, for you to have engaged with us via email, and we would all have said that's an excellent choice. Go ahead, you've got the backing of the committee. Slapped wrist, mate.
I'll take the slap risk. I definitely won't take the fig leaf reference, but I'll take the slap risk, and I will promise that I will do that in future. So thank you very much for that. And I also appreciate your contact during the week as well. That was noted. So thank you very much for that, Dawn. We're going to move on to item 7, this land discussion. Page 47. We have a public speaker on this item. Can I now invite Mr. Andrew Rowson to read out his public question? Members, this question was circulated to you in advance of the meeting. Can I confirm Mr. Rowson is there? Just coming online.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Rowson.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for your correspondence. You have the floor and you have 3 minutes, sir, to ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Article 1 of the Constitution commits the Council to its core values of working in partnership with the public, businesses and other organisations, always acting in an open, transparent and accountable manner, producing value for money and continuous improvement of its services. Under Article 3, the public has the right to see reports and background papers and any records of decisions made by the Council and its committees, except where confidential or exempt information is likely to be disclosed. This land's original long-term business plan clearly failed. Last year, after making a loss of £11.8 million and managing to pay just half of 1% of its loan interest, the company is having to sell some of its assets to generate revenue. The public has not been told the likely impact that will have on projected profits. That information is perhaps in the revised long-term business plan. In April this year, more key decisions were made in secret. Last month's This Land published 2019 accounts revealed that the County Council has offered it another large loan facility on top of the £96.5 million lent up to last year. The press and public were excluded from April's agenda item. No reason was given for exempting that information, contrary to law, and no public interest test was conducted. That lending information is not confidential, and the public has a right to see it in a timely manner and to understand how the first plan went wrong. It is their money. My question: this land's mismanagement and poor financial planning over its first 3 years of operation have led to its inability to honour its contractual loan repayment obligations without selling an undisclosed number of sites to developers for them to generate profits, the very thing the company was set up to avoid. In the light of the company chairman's comments and other revelations in this land's recently published accounts, why did the Commercial and Investment Committee breach the Council's constitution in its April meeting by concealing from the public its key decision to commit the Council to providing A, up to £85 million of additional loan funding to this land, B, an upfront payment of £17.1 million paid in August, and C, a letter of support for this failing spendthrift company? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elson. Thank you for your question. A response has been compiled, and I would like to invite Officer Tom Kelly to come forward and respond to that, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your question, Mr. Elson. Your written question relates to this land's consideration in private of the report entitled This Land Multi-Year Business Plan, Financing and Other Updates in April. The title of that report was printed in the public agenda for that meeting in April and linked to a key decision for which public notice had been given 28 days in advance as required. Although the chairman of this committee has changed since April, it was clear in April that the committee were considering how this land is funded, taking account of its multi-year business plan. The public agenda also stated that it was proposed to exclude the press and public because the report contained information, and I quote, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. The members of this committee in April had visibility of the full confidential report, and in that context voted unanimously to resolve that the press and public should be excluded for the reason as printed in the agenda. This was also noted in the minutes of the meeting. The minutes for that meeting also confirmed that, I quote, members considered a report on the revisions and updates to the This Land business plan and related issues. All committee members had attended a virtual This Land shareholder meeting prior to the committee meeting. It was resolved by a majority to receive the updated This Land business plan 2020, as well as to agree the other related recommendations as set out in that report. The suggestion that the decision to consider the report in private is a breach of the Constitution or unlawful is refuted. It is permissible to exempt information for publication for the reason given at that meeting that I've just repeated, in accordance with Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. In considering which information is made public, we recognise that the Council needs to carefully balance its concern that this land can progress its business activities effectively without revealing information to potential customers, purchasers, agents and suppliers which might jeopardise this land's commercial negotiations on the one hand, against the legitimate public interest in the deployment of public money for a company that is wholly owned by the council, on the other hand. With that point in mind, I would draw attention to pages 49 to 52 of the agenda papers for today's meeting. These confirm in the public domain that the details of loan transactions with this land in recent months, including the total amount on loan, as well as the operational boundary and total lending approved in principle, and that loans maturing during the period have been repaid as expected. Also reported on those pages is the progress being made by this land with director appointments, shareholder reporting, and planning and construction successes. Reporting to this committee is not the only place that information is disclosed publicly about this land. The CCC business plan contains an estimate of the capital commitment to this land for this year, and in total, although the progress of development is a variable, we may remain broadly in line with the published figure from the spring. CCC's statutory draft statement of accounts published in June confirms the level of lending to this land as at the balance sheet date, and that further equity investment has been advanced after the balance sheet date. And this land's own audited accounts that Mr. Rowson referred to were published in September. There are a number of assertions in the information that Mr. Rowson has submitted to the committee about this land, some of which contain inaccuracies, and it may be helpful if I just take the opportunity to address two of those that formed part of the question. On the point about additional lending of 85 million, I should emphasise that this was the approval to an upper limit and only in principle. This committee also set an operational boundary 35 million below that, and as we are today, we'll consider individual requests within those totals on a case-by-case basis. On the description of this land as spendthrift, my reply is that the work that culminated in this committee's consideration of the business plan in April was detailed and commensurate with the progress and evolution of the company over 4 years since its incorporation. The Council continues to have in place a number of mechanisms for monitoring, validating and challenging the assumptions and deliverables within that plan, leading to assurance that this land is currently delivering to that plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Rowson, I do believe you have the right to a supplementary question if you would like to ask one.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Yes.
loud and clear, sir.
Well, I wasn't going to ask a supplementary question. I wanted to make the point, if I have the time, to say that the reasons for hiding this information were not published in the agenda. The grounds were published, and that was section 12A, but no reasons were given to substantiate those grounds. The other thing, I would quibble with the inaccuracies quoted, but I don't want to have a sort of to and fro in the committee, so I'll take that offline.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rowson. Well, I will make sure. I'd like to thank you for your correspondence. You've raised some interesting points. As I say, Tom has read out a formal response, but I will send that to you, Mr. Rowson, so that you've got that in writing on conclusion of this meeting.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question or make a comment on the public part of the report, please use the raised hand function at the right of your screen to indicate this. Can I remind you that if you wish to refer to the commercially confidential appendix, we will have to go into the private session, which is where we're heading shortly. Chris, yes, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I'll be extremely careful not to refer to anything which is in the the exempt papers to this report, the appendices, although I'll be happy to refer to anything which is already a matter of public record.
Thank you.
The first thing is, I think many, if not all, the committee will have had the benefit of an email from Mr. Rowson that was sent yesterday concerning various other councils and their attempts to raise money through commercial and investment processes. And I think that that is actually an extremely helpful thing for all members to read if you haven't yet read it, because it shows just how things can go wrong if they are set up in the wrong way and are not properly monitored and any problems addressed, or if attempts are made to overreach. And I think it's really important because this is something which officers and members in this council have learned from. We've learned from the mistakes in some other local councils, and there have been some, I'm not going to name any specific names, but there are some dreadful ones in addition to those which have already been highlighted by Mr. Rosen in his email. We've learned from those lessons, and we will make sure that we in Cambridgeshire don't make some of the same mistakes that have been made elsewhere. So far as this agenda item is concerned, I think that from our point of view in this committee, it's important to bear more in mind than just the published figures of this land limited. We've set this land limited up in order to be able to act in a commercial way, to be able to achieve certain objectives at arm's length from the council. We obviously have an interest in the performance, the financial performance of this land limited. But the interrelationship between this council and this land limited is of really vital importance. And that isn't really reflected in the figures of this land limited, but relates to the fact that, first of all, we are receiving significant amounts of interest from this land limited, which assists us significantly in revenue terms. And secondly, we are effectively, in some respects, converting capital into revenue through what we do in this land, which is also of benefit to the council. So when we're looking at the effectiveness from this council's point of view of this land limited, we don't just look as though we're an investor at the figures that this land produces. We also have to think of how else we benefit as a council. And I don't think that that point always gets across very well. And it's fairly clear from Mr. Rosen's question that it doesn't get across to the public as well as it should do. So I think that that is something which we all need to bear in mind. And in connection with that, and looking at the recommendations that we've got in front of us today, I would ask, I'm not asking for the recommendations to be amended, but I would ask that what's being delegated to the officers and to the chairman in terms of the detailed terms of the loan, that we ensure that the terms which are granted to this land limited are no better than they would be able to get from the commercial market. Because we're not here to do benefit to this land limited, we're here for the benefit of the council. And in order to achieve the best balance between what goes on within this land limited and what we need in this council, it's important that we do follow the requirements of central government financing to avoid state financing, but also to benefit this council by ensuring that those terms are not at uncommercial and unrealistic rates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Chris Mallion.
Thank you, Chairman. Just actually, Councillor Bowden came back right at the end about the matter that I was going to refer to. I mean, I'm sure members of the committee are aware, and we will obviously continue to do so, that by law we can't give them favourable terms. And Councillor Bowden referenced the state aid regulations. We are very careful about the basis on which those loans are made, but we will continue to do so. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. David Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. I've got the benefit of being, I think, the only person on this committee that was around when the precursor to this land was set up. When I say precursor, it's been a continuous development. It's just the name that's changed in recent years. And it was explicitly set up for the very correct reason that we wish to add more value to the land that we had by developing it rather than simply selling it off to developers who would then take the profit on building houses. And that was clearly set up in the very beginning. And I have continued to argue that it is its prime responsibility to this council. The fact that it is morphed into a financial instrument whereby we lend them money at commercial rates, and if we could, we'd send it, I'm sure we'd lend it at higher rates still, because that converts capital into revenue, which enables Chris quite correctly to balance his books, is something which has happened over time. And you do worry a bit as to whether or not we're being hooked on a drug that we would rather not be hooked on. But the prime purpose at the beginning for this land was to add value to property to land that we already have held, and take the profit from development and not hand that over to third parties.
Okay, thank you, David. Before I go down to the next point on the list, Tom Kelly, you put your hand up. Was it in response to a previous point?
Not necessarily, Chairman. It was just to clarify, if it's helpful, I have got some further comments I can make, both in introducing the public report and should the committee wish to consider anything in private, to kind of help that as well. But it seems like we're kind of still covering some preliminary issues. So
I think we
I'll
are
wait
at the
until,
moment, Tom,
yeah.
so we'll perhaps come back to them, but thank you very much. Terry Rogers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Attention to paragraph 2.3. It's very pleasing to see that we're moving forward on our planning applications. And that's basically, I think, what has held this land back in the past. But I hope this actual movement continues in this particular area. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Linda Jones.
Thank you. Just a couple of points, really. One is, as Councillor Jenkins has said, this land was set up to be a housing company, and partly through delays in planning, partly through, I think, a business plan which was not sustainable from the start. It's been extremely slow in relation to that, and I think there are real concerns about this. The other comment I'd make is about the favourable terms. Certainly the council is lending at market rate, but one of the issues, of course, is whether on the open market you'd be able to, as this land, borrow the money, and that's not unimportant. The market might have assessed this as a company that was not worth investing in, so we need to think about that as we go forward.
And that's an excellent point, Linda. Thank you. Ian, please, Ian Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just to remind Councillor Jenkins, I think I was there at the beginning as well, David, when this land was set up, and remember all the conversations as to why we set it up, and I don't think they've changed. So that's just a bit of a history there as well.
Okay. I'd like to bring something to the meeting at this stage, and I'm conscious Mike Shellens might want to do so as well, because in the last two board meetings, you've had, as a committee, you've had two observers. We don't take part in the meetings, but we've been. Mike Shellens went to the first one of those, and I actually went to the last This Land board meeting. And what I would add is basically what I saw was a action plan that had been revised, but was now working for all the reasons that you've just said. Their planning applications are coming through. They are making progress. They've got more to do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not patting them on the back completely, but we're seeing some traction. Particular interest is subsequent granting of planning permission. I think it was by South Cambs and City on the Warts Causeway development, which is quite a significant development for this land. It was all reported at the last meeting, but it's an interesting role, the observer one, and one I would recommend if anybody would like to do it on our behalf, we're entitled to have one there. Please let the chairman know, and I'll take that forward. Mike, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Terry, I see a raised hand there. I think that's to be an observer, is it? Okay, I'll make that noted. Okay, in order to discuss the detail of confidential appendix, I would like to move the meeting into a private session, excluding the press and public. I will now ask each committee member in turn if they agree with the proposal to move into private session. Please unmute your microphone to respond. Chris Bowden.
You're mute, Chris.
He's coming on. He's coming. I can see him working it. Right, Chris, I'm going to come back to you. If you just unmute your mic and stay silent, I'll continue with the rest of the list and come back to you, please. John Gowing.
Agreed.
David Jenkins.
I am never comfortable with going into private session, so I shall abstain.
Linda Jones. I'm sorry, Linda, we need to hear that. We didn't hear that.
You're still muted.
Oh,
Still
sorry,
muted.
agreed. Sorry, I was doing it the reverse way. I beg your pardon.
Okay. Peter McDonald.
Given that there are sensitive commercial valuations, agreed.
Terry Rogers.
Agreed.
Mike Shellens.
Agreed.
Tim Wotherspoon.
Agreed.
Myself is agreed. And back to Chris Bowden. I think Chris Bowden may have frozen out. Would everybody agree that Chris is not moving about much on that screen and looks like he's frozen out?
Agreed.
Either way, Chairman, you have a majority of agreement.
Yes, I saw that. I was just about to move on. That was a majority vote in favour of resolving that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following items contain exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. As this is the final public item on the agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken the time to watch the meeting today via the Council's website. The broadcast will now come to an end. The committee is next due to meet on the 20th of November. I understand, Dawn, that what we want to do is for members to stay on this call. Is that correct?